Hello everyone, Colin Canet here for Woodwork Web. Today we're finally going to make the little thin strip jig for the table saw that so many of you have seen and commented on and asked questions about, and today I'm going to get around to finally showing you how to make one. Okay, before we get started, let's have a quick look at all the bits and pieces we're going to need to make this. So the parts for this build are pretty simple. You'll need a T-nut, and that's what a T-nut looks like. You'll need a nut and a bolt, and of course that will need to be able to thread into the T-nut. You'll need a piece of good quality hardwood. This is 2 inches wide, about 8 inches long, and 3/4 of an inch thick. You'll also need a couple of the magnetic switches, and this version comes in a couple of sizes. This is the larger size. Oh, and by the way, I've double-sided taped some anti-skid material to the back, and that really makes these even more effective. It's very thin material. And lastly, an optional, some mitre slot material. I prefer to use plastic, but you could use wood. And as you can see, it's 3/4 of an inch thick, and it's just that distance that these magnetic switches will fit under, and we're going to be drilling some holes in here. The first thing we want to do is cut the hole in the end, and the reason we want to do that is it'll show us where the placement for our magnets is going to go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to my vise and we'll lock that in there. We'll find the center and we'll drill a hole right down there. The next thing we need to do is to drill a couple of holes for our magnetic switches. And there's no right way or wrong way to do this. Originally what I used to do was lay the magnet on the wood that I wanted to put the hole on and trace around it and then use it, cut it out actually on a scroll saw, and that works just fine, but I found another method that works even better. Now these holes, ideally I like to have these holes fairly snug, and here's the reason why. I have a variety of jigs that I can use these magnetic switches in, and one of them is a fence that I built for my big bandsaw, and I can just drop those in. They fit in there snugly and they don't move around. Now there's places to put screws through them, but I don't need to do that because the top of it, when I turn it on, it pulls it down onto the surface. And the same is true with my featherboard. When I want to use my featherboard, I can just drop those in there. They move around a little bit, but I don't need to screw them because they lock in because they're fairly snug. This one's quite snug here. And of course, the jig that we're making, which is for the thin strips, same thing there. Now the way I do that, let me show you what, if it's too loose, I made one, quite a loose one. You can see how it flops around there, something like that. You probably need to put a couple of screws in. So it takes time to do that screwing and unscrewing, and of course the holes get bigger. So if you make it nice and snug, like this example that I made here, and it's really tight, and if it's too tight, you just need to sand it out a little bit, but you know, that will snug right down. You just need to turn that like that to get them out. You don't need to worry about screws. So that's what we're going to do here. The bit that I found that works perfect for this is this Forstner bit, and this is a 35mm Forstner bit, and it's typically used when you're making when you're installing European hinges. You need to drill holes, and this is the drill bit that you would use for that. So there's that drill bit, and you can see that's a 35mm bit. 34 and a bit, but look at, if we turn it to the metric or the imperial, it's a 1 3/8. Now you can use this. You could also use a hole saw, and there's what a hole saw looks like. I don't have a 1 3/8 and a hole saw, but if you have a hole saw mechanism, you could just buy this piece that goes into it. Now to prepare for the cut, I just need to find the center of my board, and I want to position one to go right there. Then I need to leave space for that, and the next one can go right there. So I've set up a temporary fence on my drill press here, and if you look at the very tip of that bit, when it runs along right along that center line. So that'll give me a nice even cut, a nice even hold all the way along. Now you'll also notice that at the back here I've got two lines, and those are 3/8 of an inch apart, and that's because I need to drill one hole at that mark, then I need to move the piece of wood along 3/8 of an inch and make the second one. So watch how we do this. Okay, here's the closest I want to be to the end. I put a little mark there, and I'm going to need to move the piece this way. So I'm going to make a little mark here on the wood, and we'll drill one position here, then we'll move the wood along, and we'll do the second one. Now, because this is a precision cut, I'm also going to want to clamp this down. Okay, I've clamped our piece down. We're at the first mark. We'll drill the first hole. Now I'll move the piece along to the second position. Clamp that down and drill our second hole. Okay, let's check that and see. That one goes in. It's a little snug. And that one goes in too. They're both a little on the snug. That one fits in just perfect. This one's a little bit snug. I might leave that. I might sand it down a tiny bit, but it goes all the way through and it works. And that one's perfect. Okay, there's that little piece, and I'm just going to put a couple of small screws in there so that you can take this out from time to time, but its purpose will be to be in the mitre slot of the saw so that you can move this whole piece up and down so that you can line it with the blade and then move it back. But first of all, I'm going to cut some, drill some pilot holes in there, and then we'll fasten that on there. Okay, I just attached that with a couple of screws, and our magnets fit in there. This one will be a little snug. And the only thing left now is to put our bolt in the end, and all the nut is for is to use the make sure that the bolt rather is secured. So we'll figure out the distance between here and the table saw blade, and then we'll just lock it with that bolt. Okay, let's go over to the table saw. Okay, there's our little jig on the table saw, and that's why I like to put the little strip in here so you can move it up, measure it, and then move it back. So I'm going to use I have a 1/16 little measuring bar here. I'm going to set it up here and set that end of that bolt to be a 1/16 of an inch from my blade, and we'll bring it back And I like to use a screwdriver in the end just so that it gives a nice tight fit. And then we'll use the nut there to lock it. And that's all that needs. Move it to this position, lock the jig, and we're ready to run some wood. Just butt it up to there, turn on the dust collector. Well, and that concludes my video on making the little thin strip jig for on the table saw. And it's a great little jig. I use this quite a bit. I'm surprised how often I go to it. And if you make these little holes kind of snug, you can use them in and out like I showed you for different things, feather boards and fences and all sorts of little things. You'll probably be amazed at things that you can come up with yourself. You'll find when you go looking for these are not cheap, so you want to be able to optimize your investment by using this to make all sorts of different jigs. And there's lots of things you could do with these things depending on what you're doing. Don't forget, if you haven't already subscribed, we ask you to do that. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. I'm still trying to get better at Instagram, but I'll get there one day. I'm Colin Canad for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.